This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Whether you need a domain, website, or online store, make your next move with Squarespace.
I grew up without a father. Mine left home when I was about 3 years old. And for anyone who's gone through that sort of thing, you'll know what a life-shattering, world-changing event that is. And I was too young to remember it very well, or maybe I blocked some of it out. But from all accounts, at that age, my dad was my absolute hero. And him leaving changed me forever, probably on some level. I remember I was sent off to boarding school for primary school, and my teachers would write letters home saying, "Is your son okay? Because we're really struggling to get him involved with anything. He seems very withdrawn in general, and he just seems quite rudderless, like he doesn't really know what he wants or where he's going." And I do remember that I had issues with authority at that age. I didn't know how to speak to older men, and maybe the reason for that is obvious, especially looking back now. And I struggled to trust anybody. I just assumed anyone I got close to would probably end up leaving as well. Becoming a teenager was even more tricky, because that's the point where you start to navigate becoming a man. And if you're doing that on your own without that guidance, you'll know what a messy and confusing process that can be. I remember one specific day, again, I was at boarding school at high school, and I was standing in the bathrooms, and I bought my first razor and shaving cream because it was time to start shaving, I could tell. But I had no idea really how to do it. Do you go up? Do you go left, right? Do you go down? How do you do this thing? And I realized I've missed out on that experience, which a lot of guys have with their dads, where they watch him shave, or he pulls them up onto the sink and shows them how, and I didn't really know. So I was trying to surreptitiously sort of copy the guys who were shaving in the sinks next to me and work out how to do this thing, and hopefully not get caught copying them, because that would have led to a great deal of teasing, and also not do it wrong, because that would have been just as embarrassing. And as sad as that is, and as unfortunate as that is, having to work all that stuff out, how to talk to girls, like what is a credit card, all this stuff that you might take for granted that someone told you, that I didn't have anyone to tell me at the time. I was very fortunate in this regard, that there were a series of men through my life who, through my teenage years and my 20s, saw a guy struggling to become a man and to navigate that, and who stood in the gap and decided that even though I wasn't their son, they were going to show me and help me and be generous with their time and their knowledge and their wisdom to help me get to that next stage. I'm back in South Africa at the moment, and I thought on this trip I'd take some time to honor some of these men. So my plan is to travel around and to visit some of the people who played the role of mentor in my life, and to shoot a portrait of them, hopefully in some measure to honor the role they played in my life. And I'd love to tell you a ton about each of them, but obviously there's not going to be time. So I'll just give you a quick story about each, and I'll share the gear I'm using and the techniques I'm using to show you how I'm getting the shots and how I planned for this trip. Sergio was a guy who wasn't in my life that long, but he was there at a really pivotal moment. About 7 or 8 years ago now, I was fired from the last church I worked for being a heretic, as I've said on this channel before. They didn't agree with the stuff I was saying, and I wasn't about to stop saying it. And I'd lost a career that I'd sunk 10 years into, and not only that, a lot of the people in the church didn't want to speak to me anymore because of the situation, and so I lost a lot of friends as well, and that was a very painful welter of emotions. And so I decided to go and speak to somebody, and Sergio was the guy. And we spoke for a good 6 months, and I just told him the story, and I was able to kind of start to see the wood for the trees as I sifted through things. And the one great piece of advice he gave me, which really sticks with me and I still use today, is to write it down. I took those 6 months to write down the things that had gone on, and I could clearly see when I wrote it down on a piece of paper, where my mistakes were, where their mistakes were, where life is just complicated and it sucks. It had this odd kind of objectifying effect when I took these feelings out of me and put them on a physical piece of paper in front of me. And I still use that trick to this day. When you're planning a portrait project, especially a project that is for your own portfolio or your own work, and you're asking people to give you their time, it's super important to be prepared and planned and actually have pre-visualized what you want to accomplish before you get there. I just think it's a respectful way to treat people's time. And the men that I'm shooting on this trip have given me so much. I don't want to waste their time by running into the room and then trying to work out what I'm going to do and make it up. I know too many photographers that do that. They kind of fly by the seat of their pants on the day. They haven't done their homework beforehand. And sometimes it works for them and sometimes it doesn't, because we're all human and inspiration doesn't strike every time. So the more homework we put in, the more we decide what is the direction I'm going for, what's my lighting setup, what's my background, what sort of look do I want to go for. It means that on the day, we're just applying the things that we've already decided, and then we'll still have to tweak and change things on the day, of course, but at least we have a target to aim for. And in this trip, I decided to make the old painters my inspiration, specifically Rembrandt. I was recently given a coffee table book of his portraits, and what struck me straight away was, one, his fearless use of shadows. He doesn't mind things falling very dark and rich in the frame so that you can't see the detail, and he uses that to draw your eye to the lighter portions of the image and the face. And then the other thing is that he did not hide or try and beautify age. In fact, he was quite ruthless about putting it on display and even accentuating some of those flaws. You didn't go to Rembrandt so that you could look 10 years younger. You went for an honest portrait. And in this case, the men that I'm shooting aren't that old in particular, but I did want to convey with these images a sense of experience and wisdom. I'm lucky enough that I live in London, so I was able to go through to the National Gallery and actually stand in front of some of Rembrandt's paintings and look at them up close. And I was struck again by his use of light and how deliberate he was about it. I mean, Rembrandt lighting is a thing we say even today because he used it so effectively and so efficiently and so consistently in his paintings to create a sense of drama and to accentuate age and wisdom, and so that the character has nothing to hide behind, but you put so much character into the image. And I got to thinking about how did he do that? And doing a little bit of reading, it looks pretty obvious that the studios they used to use were sort of longer in shape, with the subject down one end and the easel at the other, and they paint them. But along the one bank along the wall would be windows on two levels. So a lower level of windows and an upper level of windows, and each of those windows had shutters. So by opening and closing combinations of shutters, you could create larger light sources by opening a lot, or smaller light sources by just opening one window, higher light source on the upper level, lower level light source by opening the bottom shutters. And to do that, you could control your one light source, because they weren't lighting with multiple light sources in general. It's just that available light coming in through that set of windows. So it seems pretty obvious he would open one set of shutters to create that harder light source with the deeper shadows. And he'd usually do it at 45 degrees-ish and 45 degrees above. So 45 degrees off center and 45 degrees above the subject to create that nice side light on one side of the face, and the light would just bleed round a little bit so that you caught just a triangle of light on the opposite cheek as well. And that gives the image, the face, the character, so much life and so much interest. So I wanted to work out on this trip how I could kind of replicate that sort of look. Not that I'm any sort of Rembrandt, because for me it's totally the opposite to what I normally do. Usually I'm lighting with a nice large light source, which is very soft and it's very forgiving, and I'm giving a nice rim light on the back, on the hair, or adding a nice fill light to kind of balance those shadows and not let them fall too deep. This is kind of a braver way of lighting than I normally light, because there's nothing to hide behind. I have to position that light perfectly and dial it in exactly right, and bring the distance to subject exactly right, so it's got the right balance, creates the right mood. It isn't too harsh and specular, but it's also not too soft and weak, that it's creating the right amount of drama in the image I want to end up with. I also created a mood board where I printed out photos and paintings that I was responding to and that felt like the direction I wanted to go with this project. And I put them on my wall next to my computer. And then I bought some little colored stickers and I made a code for lighting and for background tone, for pose, the subject was holding himself, and an expression on the subject's face. And then I stuck stickers for lighting. Every photo where I thought the lighting was the direction I wanted to go, I put that sticker next to that photograph. For the background tone, the same. For the pose and then the expression, the same. And then I left it on the wall, and it's been sitting there for about 3 months. And any time that I'm waiting for an email or I'm waiting for something to upload, I'm just looking at that wall and scanning through again and slowly making decisions and logging them away, because in the aggregate of those things I'm responding to is the target that I want to aim for this project. So I can't stress enough how important a mood board is to just visualize and bring into the physical world the target that you want to aim for. I find it super helpful. I also know that in these images I probably want to go black and white. Obviously I'm going to shoot them in RAW and I have the option to change my mind later, but that's probably the direction I want to go with these. And I might play with some kind of triptych idea, but it really depends on the images I get and whether they'll work for what I have in mind. I've known John the longest. I met him when I was 17 years old, which is over 20 years ago now. And he's been an amazing kind of sobering influence in my life. For my 20s, I was a little iconoclastic revolutionary. If there was any structure that I was involved in or a part of that I felt was unjust, I just wanted to walk in and tear things down. And that was driven a lot by anger. And I remember having long conversations with him over the years about these feelings and about, what I felt about it and what I wanted to do about the things that I was seeing. And he never told me I was wrong. He never said, don't do that, don't say that, don't challenge that. But he modeled a different way of doing things. I think the thing that sums John up is actually he's got a set of dog tags he wears around his neck, and etched on one of them is the phrase, a long obedience in the same direction. And John's in it for the long game. He's going to plug away over time, and he's going to slowly change things and move things forward. Now, I'm never going to be John. I'm always going to want to push and move things forward faster. But in the balance of who I am and who he is, I've found he's kind of pulled me more towards his way of thinking, which has dulled some of that anger which was driving me in my 20s. And for that, I'm really grateful. So let's talk about gear quick, because I know some of you will find this helpful. I'm shooting on the Canon 5D Mark II. Those of you who follow this channel know I love these. They're older now, probably 8, 9 years old, but I buy these secondhand and I love the full frame on them, and the Canon color space is something that's definitely helped to define the look of my portraits. So I hang on to these. The autofocus on this is not great. They've definitely done better jobs in more recent years and more recent versions. But I center focus and recompose anyway, and it's fast enough for what I do, and I've kind of learned how to work with them. Definitely not as many megapixels as the newer versions, but I'm not shooting for billboards, so it really doesn't matter in my case. I'm teaming that in this case with the Sigma 50mm 1.4. I love the Sigma primes for the fact that they have great detail in them, great edge detail, and very kind of subtle but crisp contrast. And also I find that if you shoot with the Canons, especially the sort of higher end DSLRs and the very fancy L series glass, the big primes, the 1.2s, you can get images which feel a little soft, but also images that feel very saturated, especially with Canons in the reds, which you have to be careful of. And I find that if I use the Sigma primes with the Canon, it tends to just mute those colors back a little bit and hold the detail slightly more, and I really like these. I'm choosing 50mm because I want slightly more intimate portraits. I'd normally shoot on 85mm or above and be a bit further away, but I want to be closer to my subjects and I want the viewer to feel closer. So I'm using a slightly wider focal length than I normally would to give that sense of intimacy. I didn't want anything as wide as a 35 because it's going to start to distort. It's a little too much for what I want to do, but 50 felt like the right choice. In terms of lighting, those of you who watched my video where I went to Namibia to shoot portraits with the Himba, you will have seen that I took my Alien B800, which was a fairly big studio light, plus the Vagabond mini battery pack to power it, and that takes its own bag to cart around the world, which was a little bit of a pain. So I went out and I bought this, which is the Godox AD200. Goes by a few different names, but if you just Google that, I'll put a link below for all this stuff anyway. This is just slightly larger than a speed light, as you can see, but it's got 3 speed lights worth of power. And one of the nice things is it comes with a Fresnel head like a speed light, or you can change out the head, which comes in the pack, and you can have a bare bulb strobe, just like a studio strobe. So this is a great option for me, I hope, in that it will give me power, more power than a normal speed light in a very small compact package, and hopefully it becomes my sort of go-to travel studio strobe for stuff like this. And if you team it with a Godox trigger for Canon, you have the ability to control 3 of their lights on the back in different banks, which is great, just from the camera. But the amazing thing is that you can use high-speed sync with the Canons, because the Canons, basically they lose flash sync at about 1/60th of a second, and the screen starts to fill up with black if you push the shutter speed any higher. This will help you go up to 1/2000th of a second, 1/4000th of a second, which means that you can start to shoot outdoors when the sun's out and darken down the background, because you can play with that shutter speed and push it even faster. So I'm quite excited about this combo, and I really hope it works out the way I want it to. With that, I just have a clamp for my light stand, very clever little clamp where the light, and this works for speed lights, all this Godox as well, basically sandwiches in the middle like this, and I can tighten on top. Often with the speed light stands, you find it's not sitting in the center of the modifier, but this really is central to the modifier, and then you have 3 pins around for a Bowens S mount, which means I can use any Bowens mount modifier with this as well. And you've heard me talk about the fact that on this trip and on these portraits, I want to be shooting with a slightly harder light source than I normally would. So my modifier on this trip is going to be this guy, which is a portable beauty dish, my little centerpiece. And the great thing about this, I'll put links for all this stuff again, don't worry about it, but I put, the great thing about the design on this is it has a load of spokes around the outside, not just 6 or 8, but a load of spokes, so you still get that nice round catch light when it's all extended out, and your little plate goes in the center, and then obviously your light's coming through the middle. And this is, it folds up to quite a nice, small size. So I'm going to attempt to use this for a smaller light source than I normally use. I'm often using kind of big soft lighters, and hopefully that gives me what I want. The inside is white. I chose the white one rather than the silver, just to keep it slightly softer than maybe a silver one would be, less of the specular highlights. And that modifier just fits in this little bag like this. I also put the light in here and everything else as well. So it's one little bag. And that beauty dish also comes with an egg crate, so I can really kind of direct the light as well. And 2 inner baffles, so an inner and an outer baffle that really soften that light up and give me options in terms of how hard or soft I want that light to be. And the last thing is, I didn't bring this with me just because it was too big to bring on the plane, but I bought this when I arrived, and this is a Lastalite reversible backdrop. One side is a mid-gray and the other side is black, and I'm probably going to use the black for this project because I know that I want that darker background. So this is great, pops out to 1.5 by 2 meters, which is going to be plenty of size, and I'm going to be able to set that up, light, shoot in hopefully a small space. So for this project, that's the portable gear that I'm bringing with me to hopefully be able to produce some great quality dramatic portraits. Vic arguably had the most profound influence on my life. He was one of my lecturers at seminary, and I come into seminary with some very naive ideas about church and what working for a church would be like. And I turned into a very angry 20-something because I was sick of the politics that I saw and how they made the wrong things important, and even how they often couched bigotry in Christian language, and it made me angry. And I remember writing a paper for Vic where I kind of put all this stuff down and had a good rant, and he called me into his office and sat me down and he let me rant some more. I just carried on telling him about all the stuff that, you know, I saw that I didn't like, and how this probably wasn't going to work out for me. And he didn't say whether I was right or wrong, that wasn't important. He just looked at me and he said, I'm more worried about you because you seem very angry. And he said to me, I think you need to learn to grieve humanity. And I was like, what does that even mean? I mean, I don't even know where you're going with that. And I left his office confused. But those two words sort of haunted me for the next month. And I remember the day where it clicked in. What he was saying was that I had a tendency to take everything very personally and get very angry about it and feel very attacked and paint myself as the victim, like this is happening to me. But what he was saying was, we're all a mess. All human beings, we're all as insecure and scared and uncomfortable as each other. And most of what we do to each other is done out of our own fear and not out of a sense of trying to hurt somebody else. And it turned for me overnight. It turned me from someone who made a victim of myself in every situation to someone who actually had compassion for the people who were hurting me because they were hurting me out of their own hurt. And it turned my whole view of the world on its head. And I carry those two words with me every day, and it changes how I see everything that happens to me. Grieve humanity. So I hope you found some of this helpful. If you're keen to know the editing process behind some of these shots, just let me know in the comments and I'll see if I can pull something together. But the challenge I want to leave you is this: find somebody to mentor. I know it feels really good when people come to us and say, you know, we just think you're so fantastic, please mentor me, please give me all your wisdom and knowledge, and that feels good to our egos. But instead, let's us take the responsibility and us pick up the phone and offer our services to somebody else. And it might be in photography, it might be in filmmaking or painting or writing, it might just be in life in general. But while I'm saying this, you probably already have the name of someone in mind who you know you could really make a difference in their life. You could help them the next rung up the ladder. I mean, I know for me, I am the man I am today, at least in part because of the influence of the men in this video. And that challenges me to make sure that I'm being deliberate about offering the same to others. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you need a new website or a domain, especially if you're a creative, they're a fantastic option. They've got some beautifully designed, crisp and clean and minimalist templates that really show off your work. And one of the things I love about them is if I have questions about how the template works or I'm confused about how to do something, they've got a really helpful Q&A section with a series of very short 1-minute videos that will answer most of the questions that you need. And I find that a really quick way to access the info I want. And if I still can't find that info, they've got a 24-hour chat service, which has been super helpful.
Start your free trial today at squarespace.com and go to squarespace.com/Sean Tucker to get 10% off your first purchase.